Idahoans may have been given a lesson in grassroots politics last year that perhaps we didn't, in many cases, expect. And I think a lot of people may have learned a few things about how this can work and how people from a grassroots level can actually make a big impact. And I'm referring to Proposition 2 last year, which brought about Medicaid expansion in the state of Idaho. And although there's still some issues related to that with a work requirement established by the state government, but we're joined this morning by the executive director of Reclaim Idaho, and their work is not done. It looks as if this group is going to be working in politics in the state of Idaho for perhaps for many, many years to come. And Rebecca Schroeder is the executive director joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 52. And I'm going to say it's coming up on 8:35. First of all, Rebecca, welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Bill.
Well, right off the beginning, a question I've been having for the last several weeks is I've been expecting someone is going to be filing some sort of a lawsuit because we had two states east of the Mississippi where issues of work requirements came up on Medicaid expansion, and nothing's happened here yet. Is anything in the works?
We are also kind of anxiously anticipating some litigation that's not coming from our group specifically, but we do know that those type of work requirements were struck down in Arkansas and Kentucky, and we heard a lot of rumors during the session that there would be pending court cases on our inclusion of the work requirements as well. I don't have any inside track on that, though, Bill.
Now, the one thing that you are doing is you're gearing up, though, for a continued mission or a wider mission going into election year 2020.
That's right. We're calling it our accountability campaign, and I think that it really began when the people of Idaho decided to go around the legislature to take action on Medicaid expansion. And what we saw this year in the legislature was really, one attempt after another to circumvent the will of the people on not only that issue, but many other issues. Our constitutional rights, were under attack all session long. And so we feel like prioritizing accountability has to be the focus of our organization's work for the next year and a half.
Was it a surprise to many people that Medicaid expansion not only passed, but passed by such a healthy margin?
I think that it surprised some, Bill, but it didn't surprise me because I was one of the volunteers at that time that worked to collect the signatures for this. And when you take the time to do that, we had conversation after conversation with folks who are really struggling with this. The magnitude of the crisis within our Idaho communities was really apparent to me. So I felt confident that if we could qualify it for the ballot, that it would pass. And that's what we saw. We saw bipartisan, widespread, support for this initiative. It passed by almost 61% around the state.
In fact, when you were gathering signatures, you must have been getting some sort of a feel for what people were thinking, because I'm sure for a great many people this was a major issue in their lives, if not one of the most tantamount things that they were looking at.
Absolutely. It was something that resonated across the political spectrum. People's health really cannot be reduced to a partisan issue. So it was an incredible learning process, actually, to go through, the canvassing door to door for months on end and collecting those stories from around the state. For our group, inaction was no longer an option. And I'm so proud. The people of Idaho should be extremely proud that, citizens cared enough to invest that time and energy in their communities. It's the biggest legislative achievement in a generation. It's the biggest step forward in coverage in decades. And, come 2020, tens of thousands of Idahoans will have the ability to see a doctor perhaps for the first time in their adult lives. So while we didn't get exactly what we voted on from the legislature, we certainly need to take, the time to recognize what an enormous achievement the people of Idaho did accomplish by passing Prop 2.
What we'll do is we'll take a short break, Rebecca, and we've got about 15 minutes left following the break. And if you're willing, maybe you could take some telephone calls too today.
I'd love to. Yes, thanks, Bill.
All right, we want to mention Rebecca Schroeder is joining us this morning. She is the executive director of Reclaim Idaho. These were the people, to surprise of a great many of us, who managed not only to get the Medicaid expansion on the ballot, but it got passed by a whopping margin this past Election Day in November. We've got more on the way. Bill Cawley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 8:40, and we're at 53. Rebecca Schroeder is the executive director of Reclaim Idaho, which these are the people who got Proposition 2 on the ballot last year, and then surprisingly, at least to many of us, got it passed overwhelmingly, and this is for Medicaid expansion in the state of Idaho. We're at 8:43. It's 53. Bill Cawley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number for reaching the program, 208-736-0300. And Rebecca, I'm not surprised. We've got people who are looking to talk to you. So if you don't mind, we'll go directly to the telephones. I think I just lost the caller who was trying to reach us on line one. So again, that number, 208-736-0300. And let me back these up again. And before we do that, let's point out that your organization isn't done. That at this stage of the game, when I mentioned earlier, you're looking at widening your scope. You're actually going to be looking to challenge some legislators in Boise who you feel are getting in the way of the will of the people. And I think this is related to the effort to try to change the way that we actually collect signatures.
Yes, that's right. We saw a direct attack on the initiative process, one of our constitutional rights this year. And Reclaim Idaho is almost certain that we're going to see those attempts again next year. So we want to keep the public discourse going. We're going to be involved in hosting some town halls all across the state this summer, where we're going to be focused on communities discussing these issues, the initiative rights, how they feel about Medicaid expansion, to keep that going in the public dialogue. Then election time, we will be supporting candidates who are challenging legislators that we saw so tragically out of step with the constituents that they serve. This is not personal. This is about the votes that they took and the actions that we saw in the legislative session this last cycle. So we will be getting more deeply involved in elections, and we're tossing around the idea of filing another initiative as well. We don't know we're not ready to talk about what that initiative is yet, but we're thinking really big. And you're absolutely right that our organization has more work to do. In fact, we're just getting started.
We've got a caller looking to join us. And caller, you're up next. You're on the air with Rebecca Schroeder. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Karen, and I'm from Haley, and here's my question. I've heard some legislators say that only people in Boise called the governor in opposition to the initiative bill that was vetoed. Is that the case?
Well, thank you for your question, Karen. That is not at all accurate. That is not at all accurate. Our group, Reclaim Idaho, actually went on a statewide veto tour from Boise all the way up to Sandpoint and back again, talking to folks in communities about this. And, what we saw was widespread opposition to this. Not to mention that we had an online petition where we were able to gather close to 12,000 signatures in 10 days from folks representing 150 different communities across the state of Idaho, urging the governor to veto this legislation. I personally sat in the governor's office for several hours, probably waiting for time, or hoping for an appointment with the governor. The phone was ringing off the hook constantly, and I think that it is undeniable. We just saw a Post-Register article yesterday, actually, that showed email interactions regarding that initiative bill. That is completely inaccurate and untrue. There's widespread opposition.
Karen, does that help?
Yes, thank you so much, Rebecca. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Want to thank her for the telephone call. When the effort to try and tie up or make the initiative process more difficult came along, there were a lot of Republicans who suddenly said, whoa, wait a minute. One of them was on the air with us, Representative Giddings at the time, because there's a belief that, this is not only going to impact Reclaim Idaho, but if conservatives are trying to get a ballot measure posted, they're going to be impacted by that too. And I think this was seen by many as an across-the-board assault on this process.
That's absolutely right, Bill. Representative Giddings actually testified in a committee hearing against this legislation, and she was joined by, as you mentioned, some of her Republican colleagues in opposition to this. This is not a partisan. Our constitutional rights are not a partisan issue. And we saw representatives like Giddings who were willing to acknowledge that, and then we saw others who just were determined to silence the voters. So it was interesting to see those coalitions happening this year.
It's 8:48. We've got another caller with us, and caller, you're up next. You're on the air with Rebecca Schroeder from Reclaim Idaho. Caller, go ahead.
Yes, I hope that this new initiative that Rebecca's talking about will include, and any new initiative will include funding sources.
Rebecca, your response to that? He brings up the point about funding sources.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would have no problem including a fiscal note. There was plenty of analysis around Prop 2, and we would have had no problem with that. But including a funding source is not even something that we require of our legislators when they propose a bill. The Medicaid expansion sideboard bill that was passed had a completely nebulous fiscal note attached to it that we still have no idea how much that's going to cost, and we certainly don't know where that money is coming from. So requiring citizens to do the job of the JFAC committee is unreasonable.
I was reading last week a story in, I guess the governor's name, I think it's pronounced Raimondo, out of Rhode Island, and what they have done with Medicaid expansion is they put a tax on employers, and it's going to be based on how many people are actually Medicaid recipients who might be working on various staffs, which I guess in some cases that would include a lot of people who are part-time and the like. But it is going to be very costly for some of those businesses. And I know that we haven't come up quite yet with a real idea of how we're going to fund all of this. But are you at all a little concerned that there could be some backlash if it impacts some of these smaller business owners?
Well, it will impact small business owners, Bill, in a very positive way, because a lot of their employees are going to get health insurance. That you're right, for a small business owner right now to be able to offer coverage to their employees is out of reach for many. We have tens of thousands of working folks that are, working in the service industry, construction professionals, seasonal workers who will gain access to health insurance, and it will relieve that burden from those small businesses. And additionally, I'd like to point out that, the funding for a clean Medicaid expansion, what the voters approved in November, was included in Governor Little's budget months ago, at the very beginning of this session. That was the most fiscally conservative and the most responsible way to implement Medicaid expansion. What we saw passed by the legislature is going to require additional millions of dollars to cover thousands fewer people. So the idea that, those measures were to reduce the cost of the program is completely wrong. We missed the boat on the most fiscally conservative way to implement. That was what the people voted for. And that was included in Governor Little's budget proposal. Those funds were coming from something called the Millennium Fund, which is a tobacco endowment. So that was already, all the legislature had to do was pass that funding piece through JFAC, and that's where they should have stopped.
We have another caller looking to join us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air with the Executive Director of Reclaim Idaho, Rebecca Schroeder. Go ahead.
Okay, just for outward appearances, I voted against it. But I'm not against people getting some kind of coverage. What I'm against is the fact that we never address the real problem. And the real problem is the increased cost of medical care. Medical care is not a right. It's something that you do. Way back when, they used to trade chickens for medical care. It's not a right. It's not in the Constitution. It's not anything. But everybody's answer is make the public pay for it.
Rebecca, your response to that?
Well, I agree that cost overall is a huge concern. I actually have a son with cystic fibrosis, which is a rare genetic disease, and it is frightening, the costs that are surrounding his care. But I do think that it's important to point out that in terms of cost, while the national government is looking at our healthcare system at large, we have to look at our communities and the fact that providing managed preventative care is both cheaper and better for people than emergency room care, which we also pay for as taxpayers. We have to acknowledge that we are already paying for folks in the gap one way or another, because not having health insurance, unfortunately, does nothing to alleviate the need for medical care sometimes. That's why we have those massive catastrophic care and indigent care funds paying for those folks right now. So I agree that, controlling cost overall is a huge concern for our nation, a huge concern. But in the meantime, covering people will do so much for the health and the economy in our communities.
We had about 4 minutes to go. When I was a young reporter, this was 30 years ago, I remember sitting down and doing a lengthy interview with the daughter of Dr. Albert Schweitzer, and he had passed away in the mid-'60s, so he's been gone a long time. She told me, this was maybe 1990, she told me at the time that before he had passed away, he had predicted that the cost of medical care would be skyrocketing because we had so many new wonder drugs and also wonder machines that we could now bring to bear on all of this, but we didn't know how we were going to pay for it. That seems, at least to me, is to be the one reason we have not gotten a handle on how to pay for all of the new technology and science. And as long as that continues, the cost of healthcare is going to continue to skyrocket. Would you agree?
Wow, you are really speaking to me here, Bill. I mean, like I mentioned, my son with cystic fibrosis takes a new miracle drug that is a lifesaver for him. But right now, our insurance is getting billed more than $30,000 a month for that drug. I understand that this is not a sustainable way forward as we continue to personalize medicine. It's amazing what we're able to do. I'm so thankful that these medicines exist, but we have to find a way, without access, what good does it do to develop these kind of amazing miracles? So we're definitely approaching a point in time where we're going to have some decisions to make.
We're going to squeeze a caller in here with just a couple of minutes to go. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air with Rebecca Schroeder from Reclaim Idaho. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Molly. I was just curious what Reclaim Idaho is planning for 2020 and how we can get involved with them.
Thanks, Molly. Well, I would encourage you to visit our website, reclaimidaho.org, where we spell out our plans for accountability. Look for some town halls this summer we're planning those all across the state to discuss kind of what happened in the legislature this last session and that accountability piece. We will also be supporting candidates in real ways. So there's space on the website to volunteer, sign up for our newsletter, and of course, follow us on social media to stay in tune with all of the events and updates on any initiative that we may be filing this summer.
I was looking at the website over the weekend, and this is probably not the most urgent question you've ever had, but can't you find anybody to paint that RV a new color?
We have gotten lots of suggestions, but now somehow, Medicaid in Idaho is associated with that green. I don't think that we may repaint the Mobile, but I think that it's always got to be green. We change our duct tape message on the side every now and then as the situation demands, but we may need to update our vehicle eventually. It starts with a flathead screwdriver, so I'm not sure how road safe it really is.
Well, very, very quickly, as you pointed out earlier, and Molly may have been alluding to this, you've got a lot in the works, but a lot you can't reveal right now for 2020.
That's right. We want to be really thoughtful. We understand intimately how difficult the initiative process is. So we want to make sure that we are addressing the biggest crisis and that we have the buy-in of the state of Idaho before we file and attempt something, because it truly is just an enormous amount of effort. We want to, we have several crises here in this state to address. So we're being very thoughtful and doing our research on what we want to throw our energy behind in terms of an initiative. But like I said, we're thinking big. We're going to be involved in races. We are probably running an initiative of our own. We're continuing to expand as an organization.
Well, Rebecca Schroeder, I'd like to say thank you for joining me today, and keep us posted.
Hey, thank you so much, Bill. It was a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
All right, take care. Rebecca Schroeder is the executive director of Reclaim Idaho. Which these are the people who are responsible for getting Proposition 2 passed getting it on the ballot and then getting it passed last year. It's 54. We have one more hour of Magic Valley this morning still ahead. And I do want to point out news is coming up next.